There was once an experiment conducted on butterflies, and what they did was they took the male butterflies and put them in a particular environment, and they presented them a cardboard female butterfly. So it looked like the female, but it was bigger, it was brighter, and it was more colorful than any real life female butterfly. And the males would swarm to this piece of cutout cardboard and try really hard to mate with it. I mean, it was, you know, it was so brilliant and so brightly colored, and it had colors that don't naturally exist on any known butterfly. And they could never successfully mate with it. And they would try and try and try, but they never could because it's just a piece of cardboard. And what was really interesting about this study was that they started to put real female butterflies into the box with the males. And the males now had the opportunity to reproduce and wouldn't do it. They would still keep trying to forcibly mate with this decoy cardboard cutout butterfly instead of mating with a real female butterfly. So what I wanted to talk about this week is addiction, but each addiction I wanted to spend a different, I wanted to talk about as a different topic. So at one time I wanted to spend an entire live stream on pornography, and another one on gambling, and another one on drugs and alcohol and substance abuse. But as I was studying it, I realized that there's something that three big ones have in common. That's pornography, gambling, and social media. And what they have in common actually sets them apart just a little bit from the drugs and alcohol and other addictions. So I decided to lump those into one category and talk about them and the destructive effects they have, but also what they have in common. And it's something you might not would guess on the surface. So we're going to talk about addiction to internet pornography first, and that's a big topic, and I wanted to put that first, and we're going to spend the most time on it because it's the most rampant addiction by far. I mean, it's not even close to gambling addiction. Now, social media addiction may have it beat, honestly, but let's talk about this first because it is the most obvious. So, it is not a coincidence that after internet porn became a thing, now here we are about 20 to 30 years after that, and there's a record of men under the age of 40 who have developed erectile dysfunction in this country. And, well, again, that is not coincidental. So back in our parents' and grandparents' day, all they had were magazines, and there's something really different about magazines where, you know, you can go to a store and buy a magazine, and there's kind of some anonymity there. Even with renting a pornographic movie, I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of that embarrassment when you check out, but then when you take it home and watch it in the privacy of your own home, and, you know, nobody really knows, and there's a fee attached, and it's inconvenient to keep the tape for too long, so you have to bring it back and all that. So, internet porn changed that, and it made instant access to anything your mind can possibly come up with immediately. And it's scary how quick, like, the amount of videos and the amount of content and the type of content that is anything that the absolute darkness of the human imagination can come up with was immediately available everywhere, all over the place. And at first, like, it still costs something. Like, if you wanted to look at pornography on the internet, most websites would give out a little bit of free content to lure you in, but then they would charge for access, like a subscription service, for the rest of their content for full-time access to it. And that was the way, you know, people could get into debt, and it could, you know, drain their bank accounts or whatever. And even back then, like, DVDs were still big. So as fast as that took over, though, the porn industry has already changed dramatically. I mean, the very face of it in just recent, maybe not even the last 10 years, maybe about the last 7 or 8 years. It was already a dark and terrible and destructive industry before, but it's really, uh, its true nature and what it really does to people is getting worse and worse. So the porn industry spends a lot of money and time on good PR. They try to make themselves sound like a harmless industry. And what they want you to believe is that pornography is something natural. People do defend porn and say that it's mostly harmless because, I mean, hey, humans are driven by that desire to reproduce. We all have sexual desires. It's part of life. So, with those sexual desires comes easy visual stimulation, and so humans are going to do that, right? But that's what they want you to think, but there's a very destructive lie behind that. So the industry has done a good job of convincing a lot of people that porn is mostly harmless, and I really hope that people are starting to wake up and come to the realization that that's not the case. And it actually taps more into our brains than just the desire to reproduce. So it's not just your sexual desires that drive you to look at pornography. First of all, there's an emotional component to it. And I may say a few controversial things about that, but it's also not a coincidence that porn addiction rates are so high in this country a couple of generations after the women's rights movement and after the sexual revolution, which has had catastrophic effects on the nuclear family. So is it based on just the desire to reproduce? See, the problem is we have to understand how addiction works, and this is what all addiction has in common. So we can probably also include drugs and alcohol. You're not actually addicted to the substance itself. You're addicted to what it does. So there's a chemical in your brain that I've talked about plenty in my mental health live streams called dopamine. And so in the back of your brain is the reward center. So when you accomplish something and your brain rewards you for it, it gives you a rush of dopamine in your nervous system. And so that flood of dopamine that moves backward to forward and sort of bathes your neurons temporarily, it feels good. It's sort of like endorphins after you exercise. It's a feel-good rush, and you feel good. And there's a natural reason why that mechanism is there. So, if you go back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and I'm, again, going back to my main thesis for how I approach mental health and psychology, is that everything, or most all the things that we struggle with, whether it's depression, anxiety, are actually the normal functions of our brain. They're the natural things, but it's trying to have these residual leftovers in a modern civilized world, because our brains were not designed and our nervous systems were not designed to live in the modern world. They're designed to live in the wilderness and be hunter-gatherers. And trying to live in a modern world with buildings and restaurants and streets and cars and all that, a whole lot of things that don't make sense to us on the surface actually come from residual structures in our brains that are left over from our hunter-gatherer days. And this includes addiction, and actually addiction is a big part of that. So if you go back in time, go back all the way to our ancestors who were hunting, woolly mammoths and things like that. When you go out and hunt, you're taking a gamble. So there's a risk involved. And, most hunts are not successful. So any predator that goes out, whether it's lions or humans, when they go out and hunt, most of the time they're going to be unsuccessful. The antelope is going to get away. But every now and then, there's a success factor. So you'll bag that mastodon, or you'll catch that antelope, and you'll have food for yourself and for your tribe back at home. And so that's where the dopamine rush comes in. So your nervous system is designed to flood you with dopamine to reward you for that feeling of accomplishment that you did the right thing. And that rush of dopamine is what drives you. It drives you to go out and hunt and to go out and look for food and forage and find berries and things like that, because it increases our odds of survival. So it's an important mechanism to have in place. But what addiction does is it gets into that part of our brain and then turns it on us towards an unhealthy habit. So like porn addiction and gambling and social media addiction, what they all do is they create the simulation of hunter gathering and success. So you're actually video games do this too, believe it or not. So you're getting a sense of accomplishment when you haven't actually accomplished anything. Like you've sat there and you've worked hard and you've played this game and you're in this simulated world and you've beaten the level, you've gotten to the next level, you've gotten a high score, whatever. Your brain floods you with that rush of dopamine that's intended to reward you for a successful hunt. But instead, what happens is nothing happened. You didn't actually catch anything. You didn't bring anything home. There's no useful survival mechanism behind that. And so this dopamine rush in our brains, it also is used for reproduction. I mean, it comes from the same part of our brain. So just behind your eyes is an organ called the amygdala, and it's part of the central part of your brain. And what it does is it's a small, tiny organ, but as soon as information goes through your eyes, because humans are visual creatures, all information goes through your amygdala first before it's processed and then sent to the cerebral cortex, which is where the critical thinking and analysis and logic and reason take place. And so emotions and thirst and hunger and desire for sexual reproduction, a lot of our aggressive tendencies are actually centered in the amygdala. And so your amygdala can actually be overdeveloped, and that's, people who are too sensitive, who are too aggressive, who lose their temper too easily or what have you, versus people who are more logical or analytical. Their amygdalas may actually be physically smaller, but their cerebral cortex, which is higher up in the brain, may actually be like larger and overdeveloped. So the brain is not used to being exposed to too much dopamine. So that's one of our problems is how often do humans hunt? Well, obviously now not much at all, but our hunter-gatherers, they had to go out and forage for food every day, but they had to go on hunts. And how successful is a hunt? Maybe every other day, maybe a couple of times a week if you're lucky. They would, most of those hunts would be failures. But every now and then, they'd catch a lot of meat and, kill a buffalo or whatever. And so the brain is not used to being exposed to too much dopamine. Like maybe just a few dopamine hits every other day. But what addiction does is that it bombards you on a regular basis, which your brain wasn't designed to handle. So let's take porn addiction, for example. So you can't live in constant sexual stimulation. It's unhealthy. It's not good for your brain. It's not good for your nervous system. So the idea, and it seems like it's an enticing thing. It seems like it would be tempting to want to live this life where you live in a sexual nirvana, a harem or whatever, where you're just surrounded by the opposite sex and you just get to have all the sexual contact and intercourse you want for all eternity. But that quickly becomes hell. Addictions become hell on earth. Like they start off with that dopamine rush and, that sense of feeling good and the reward that you get from it, but it becomes hell very quickly. So addiction always works with progression, and this is also true with drugs and alcohol, is that, that first hit, it doesn't take much for you to get that first dopamine rush, but then when you go back, that the same amount doesn't stimulate as much dopamine. And so you don't get as much of a high as you did before. And so then you'll have to do a little bit more to get that next high. And that high won't be as high as the first one was. And so that's the vicious cycle of addiction, is you go back and go back and go back. And it takes more each and every time. And we can see that in the addiction to online pornography, which is really, really rampant and really terrible. So, like I said earlier, we weren't meant to have constant a dopamine rush bombarding us every single day, but online porn has made it so easy. And at one time, you went from the magazines at the store to the computers. Now we've gone from computers to tablets and cell phones and apps where it's instant. It's instantaneous. You can get it in an absolute second. And people are addicted. They're carrying it with them all the time. Like you can carry it into the bathroom for a quick fix, and people think you're just using the bathroom, doing your normal body functions. And you can sneak and do it at work and nobody will know. And as soon as you get home, you're ready to do it at any time. It's so much easier to hide it. And because of that, it's so much easier to continue to be bombarding your senses and over and over and over again. But each and every time, it takes more. Like, you have to go back for more. And so when you first get into porn addiction, the sight of nudity might be enough to achieve that sexual stimulation, and then you're done. But next time, it's going to take a little more than that. And so at first, when you get into the addiction, it would never occur to you to look up, some of the more hardcore stuff, some of the really horrifying things that are out there. But the problem is the stuff that you originally looked at gets boring very quickly, and you can't get as much of a dopamine rush out of it. So you have to up the ante, in order to achieve that. And when you're in an addiction and you're craving that rush of dopamine, the irrational parts of your brain turn off. Like, there are these terrible stories of drug addiction where people are so fixated and so determined to get their drug rush that they'll do anything. They'll start robbing people. They'll start, smashing windows of stores in to steal from the cash register. Something a normal person normally wouldn't do. But, that desire to get that next hit is so great that it drives you to do that. And it turns the logical, reasonable part of your brain off. Your amygdala, you're thinking purely with your amygdala, where there's aggression and emotion and, irrationality going on. So then you progress to the more hardcore stuff. And then from there on, you move to the more vile stuff. Some of the truly horrifying things that are out there on the internet waiting for you. And we can look at some of the most common search terms. There has been some data and studies about internet porn. What are the most commonly searched terms looking for particular types? And it's horrifying stuff when you hear it, like rape, BDSM, being tied up, and bondage videos, incest. Incest porn is becoming a thing, as is, cartoon porn, like, cartoon characters in pornographic situations. Like, when you first get into it, that is so sickening to think about, and you're like, I would never do that. But it's the progression, and it eventually gets to where, and even bestiality. You wonder, how could anybody be turned on by something like that? But if you've been in the addiction long enough, and you're starting to get desperate for that craving, just like the drug addict who started off as a normal, healthy person, but now he's at the point where he's robbing people on the street just to get the money to buy more drugs, because he's that desperate for the most recent drug hit. So we can tell of the devastating effect that it's having. So what I am going to say next, again, a little controversial, but I do think the destruction of the nuclear family has a lot to do with this. Men overwhelmingly are the ones struggling with porn addiction. And one of the problems we have is that for all people, men and women, when you're a child, your relationship with your parent of the opposite sex, your parents had to have sex to create you. So your parents shape your perceptions on sexuality. And if you have an abusive or neglectful relationship with your parent, but especially, this is one thing Freud may have been right about, was the opposite sex. So if you're a daughter, we're talking about your father. Your father is going to shape your outlook on men and how you pursue romantic relationships. Your brothers may shape it on you as well. But this is also true for men and their relationships with their mothers. And since men, by and large, are the most addicted to internet porn nowadays, we have a generation of men who, it just seems like the odds are stacked against us so badly. Because, for one thing, we had the women's rights movement, and we had, modern feminism, and what that's led to is women at the workplace. Now, before I proceed, please don't accuse me of saying that women shouldn't have jobs. Women should stay at home and be barefoot and pregnant. Though I would say that for a lot of women, I'm not going to get into this. This is for a different topic. For a lot of women, we've convinced them that success in the corporate world and going into the man's world and invading, jobs and getting jobs and successful careers and accomplishment through money is the ticket to happiness. And if I wonder that women have now achieved that and they're still angry and still think that men are hiding something from them, they may need to stop and ask, does that really lead to happiness? It may not be that men are still hiding something, some higher paycheck or some big monetary award. It's like a carrot at the end of the stick. It may be that for women, raising and nurturing children is the natural function of their bodies and is the most rewarding thing they can do and have in life, to raise successful, healthy children that they get to love and nurture. But this is also the most rewarding thing for men. So I'm not trying to be anti-woman by saying that, or saying that women need to stay home and be barefoot and pregnant. For men to reproduce and have children and stay and be good fathers, stay at home and not leave the mothers, also the most rewarding thing a man can do, and not any business or success in the corporate world. But we have a generation of men that has grown up with, in the aftermath of the sexual revolution, in the aftermath of the women's rights movement, women going to work, dumping their sons off at daycare where they're bullied, where a minimum wage worker is not going to give them the proper amount of nurturing. And so these boys are growing up in the world with a skewed perspective on women. They don't have the healthy, normal relationship with women that they should have. Their outlook on women is shaped by neglectful mothers and often absent fathers, and that's especially brutal. So again, listening to this, if you're a single mother, I'm not, if you've been a great mother and you've raised wonderful children and you've made it, great. I'm not saying all single motherhood is bad. I'm saying that overall, statistically speaking, we've seen a rise in things. Now, you factor that in with how easy it is in the aftermath of the information age for men to be exposed to internet pornography, and it's just a deadly trap. So you have men with skewed views of women and, twisted, torn ideas of how to have a relationship with a woman, and porn makes that so much worse. So with internet pornography, let's talk about the effects it has. So there's been a lot of scientific evidence on this, studies in recent years, and has overwhelmingly showed that porn addiction is catastrophic for men, really for all people. But so it has the same effects on the nervous system that we talked about drugs do. So drug addiction bombards your nervous system with that dopamine rush, which ends up messing up the wiring of your brain. You can't process information normally. You have worse cognition skills, and for men, they also developed erectile dysfunction. So at an early age, before the age of 40, so going back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, living in the wilderness, sex was great, but it wasn't a top priority. So there was the desire to reproduce and have more children and continue our genes going, but that was a rare treat that got to happen. And so the way humans are designed, we're not designed to have sexual stimulation bombarding us 24/7. And so men's, ability to perform with a real woman is burning out very quickly because of that. And so it has that terrible effect on men. It's destroying their nervous systems. Now, if you weigh what you get with pornography versus what you get with a real healthy relationship with a woman, it's really hard to see that there's a contest, because with the internet, you're not actually reproducing, but you're seeing anything you want to see. Just like the butterflies I used at the beginning in the introduction. You have something fake, but it's so beautiful and it's so erotic and it's so, beyond anything you could ever hope to imagine. And you can zero in on that one image or that one video. It takes a lot at a certain point to continue to achieve that sexual satisfaction that a real relationship with an actual woman can no longer do. And so you may want a real relationship, you may be struggling with loneliness, but like when you're having a real sexual relationship with a woman, it's never as satisfactory if you're also addicted to internet pornography. And you can see these unreal images and these women who are cartoonishly proportioned. And now it has a terrible effect on men. But let's also talk about how the industry preys on women, because that's actually not talked about enough, is the devastating effects that the porn industry has had on its actresses. So at one time, maybe about 15 years ago, Jenna Jameson was the most famous porn star in the world. And you would look at this woman, and she was beautiful, and she was, had a great proportions, and, like, she was famous, and she had this persona that she had. But when she retired from the industry, now she's come out and spoken about how predatory it is on women, and how she would never want her own daughter, because she has children now, to never go into that line of work. And so a woman can be very attractive, but pornography tends to attract women who, for one thing, don't have much of a future. So most porn actresses, were waiting tables and didn't have any plans on going to school, or, having a further career. And they often come from damaged backgrounds. So they may be extraordinarily attractive, but they may have had an abusive father, or a father who was absent during their childhoods or whatever. And so women like that are more gullible, they're easier targets, and the industry lures them in with promises of fame. And if you look at, like, the average, like, some of the porn actresses that are really famous at the top of the game, like Jenna Jameson was at one time, for example, and they've been doing it for decades, those women are few and far between, and very few, if any, women actually make it. But it's the allure. So the industry will lure you in and say, you could be rich, you could be famous, you could live in a mansion, you could have anything you wanted if you'll just do this porn act, and you do some hardcore stuff online, and people will love you and flock to you, and you'll get all these offers for work. And the reality is 99% of them, that's never going to happen. They're going to do one video, and it's really terrible, because one of the most popular topics in pornography is young, innocent teenage girls. So the legal age is 18, so it's like girls who have barely turned 18 years old, and that's like the younger the better, which is very creepy and unsettling, and kind of has some pedophilia tendencies to it. So these barely legal girls come in, and they're gullible. They have to do something really filthy and perverted, and usually they're only ever going to make one video, and it's going to be absolutely bring shame to their family, disgust their town they grew up in, all their friends, everyone they went to school with is immediately going to find out. And usually the industry takes young girls like that and promises them fame in the world, but then it chews them up and spits them out. And for them to keep getting work, they have to resort to more and more disgusting things. And that's where the bondage stuff, the rape videos, the women being tied up, and just the real nasty stuff. Those are usually women who have tried regular porn and aren't getting any more offers, and they're desperate to keep their so-called career going. And then often in the video you're watching, and this has got a real creep factor to it, many of those women have been drugged. So in order for the woman to, and she may be an actress, and she may make it look like she really enjoys the sexual activity or whatever, with this big smile and this really seductive look that she has on her face, but in reality she's actually been drugged in order to do that. And so one way that the porn industry has changed is, at one time it was subscription based, but now we've had the rise of things like like YouTube changed the face of the internet, because now with YouTube you just have this one website where everybody can upload any video of anything. And so now you've had entire careers made of people vlogging, or people just making videos about whatever they want, or clips, your favorite clips from your favorite movie that you can now watch at any time. The same thing has happened in the porn industry. So pornography has now had these YouTube equivalents. So like, they have certain names like RedTube or PornoTube or whatever. So anybody can upload any video of anything. And those websites are flooded, absolutely flooded with new video clips, and there's no way they can keep. Now these porn sites, like when you enter them, they have this disclaimer saying we don't allow any illegal content, any child pornography. We don't allow any of that, or anything without consent. But in reality, people upload things to it so quickly, and there's so much billions of hours of content on those sites they can't possibly monitor it all. And there was a recent study done that found out that a lot of that underground stuff, amateur videos or whatever, are actually illegal. Like some of those are actually prostitutes. There actually is child pornography on those websites that gets uploaded and gets by undetected. And they found that there are women who were abducted, who are victims of human trafficking. And see, the thing is, like I said, if you get in porn enough and you can't get out of it, and you get worse and worse about it, eventually, there's the allure of rape fantasy videos. And, they may say at the beginning of the video, this is just a fantasy, this is just a woman acting, she's not really getting raped or whatever. But the reality is, a lot of those women, how can you tell that it's not real? How can you tell that this woman wasn't abducted off the street and is being held at gunpoint and being forcibly raped while it's recorded for real? And unfortunately, the study found that in a lot of cases, it is real. Like these are real criminal acts that have slipped through the cracks and are now visible to be watched. And so that's an extremely dark, evil, destructive industry. And so the longer you spend in it, this is what's very important. If you're in any kind of addiction, and we'll talk about some of the others next, but you got to get out of it now. And I'm serious about that. If you're in this addiction, the longer you stay in it, the longer it's going to take you to get out of it. And the longer you continue to indulge in that addiction, the more irreversible the brain damage it's causing could be. So the damage it's doing to your nervous system, the longer you spend in it, you could reach a point of no return where you could never repair your nervous system from all the bombarding that you've done. So let's talk about gambling now. Gambling works very much the same way as pornography. So, like I said earlier, what gambling, social media, and pornographic addiction have in common is that they tap into our inner instincts, our need for hunting and gathering. So you're going on the hunt. Most hunts are unsuccessful, but occasionally there will be a successful one, and these are simulations of that. And so gambling works the same way. So when you go to the casino, it's all about risk and reward. And so you play a game and you lose. You lose some money. You play a game, you lose some money. You play a game and you lose some money. And then all of a sudden, you win a game. And it's like the excitement of that win. And once again, that simulates the hunting aspect of your brain, the hunting and the gathering. So with pornography, there's a gamble involved because not every picture of a woman or whatever, or not every hardcore video is going to turn you on. You're going to look at this one, nah, this one doesn't do anything for me. Nah, this one doesn't do anything for me. Nah, this one. But then all of a sudden you hit that one, wow, this is an amazing video, and you get that rush of sexual gratification out of it. So it's the risk, reward. It's the same thing with gambling probably on a more explicit level. So you're going out and you're playing a game, losing, boom, I won. And it's that feeling, that rush that gets you to keep coming back. So casinos are designed to encourage that as much as possible. And, there's the old saying, obviously, the house always wins. So what they're designed to do, and it's kind of insidious, is that they lure you in, you lose a little bit, then you win, you get excited about winning, you want to chase that feeling of having won, but then you lose every game after that until you've lost all of your money. And that's kind of the pattern that everybody who's in a gambling addiction goes through. And there's a reason for that, and they may not even realize, the casinos are designed in a clever way to fool your brain into thinking that you're actually independently making these decisions, when in reality the casino is making it for you. Their pathway is sending you around the tables, and each table that you arrive at, or each slot machine that you arrive at on purpose, is actually tapping into that and putting you through that pattern. And so by the time you reach the end, you can't win any games. You've lost all of your money, and you're now in debt or whatever, and you've gambled all of the money you had away. You haven't won anything. And you just think about how that ruins lives, how it ruins finances, and how it lures people into going back. So if you think of somebody who's always in motion, they're always busy doing something, they're always active, when they sit down, they kind of have trouble being still. So it's like that old saying: a body that stays in motion tends to stay in motion, and a body at rest tends to stay at rest. So if you move around a lot, then you try to sit down, you start getting this like anxiety going where I just want to get up and do something. I can't sit still. I got to get up and do something. And see, it's like because your body's used to constantly moving around. And addiction works the same way. It's like twitching muscles, or it's like the jitters. It's like you're trying to get away from your addiction, but that addiction is always calling you. And it's always luring you and saying, come here. And you know, it's something internal mechanism in you going like, I gotta go look at pornography. I gotta go. And next thing you know, you're getting up in the middle of the night and, you know, you can't even sleep at night. You're waking up early and you're looking at porn, or, you know, with the casino, it's like, man, I gotta go gamble some money. I gotta go gamble. I might win this time. And how insidious that is. All right. So when you step into a casino, and I'm gonna let you in on a secret here. The casinos are designed to dull your senses, and what they do is they bombard you with sensory overload. Because you know there's something exciting, and I mean, I've actually been to casinos like on cruise ships, and it's like I just like to go in and walk around because there's an atmosphere of excitement in the air. You know, there's people winning money. Some of those people are plants to make you think that you know your odds of winning are better. But you know, people are winning money. Machines are jangling, and there's the red carpet on the floor, and there's you know beautiful women walking around offering you things, or you know cutting the cards, and you know like the video game ones may have this you know unbelievably gorgeous, overly sexualized female character in it, and you know like there's the smell of smoke in the air or whatever, cigars, and what this does is it gives you a sensory overload. So like I said earlier, the way your brain is designed is that you know your survival mechanism, the amygdala, is right behind your eyes. It's in the central part of your brain, and once you information passes through that first and is processed emotionally. So humans are visual and emotional creatures before they're logical creatures. So then information is sent later to the upper part of your brain, the cerebral cortex, for logical analysis. So casinos are designed to completely shut off your cerebral cortex and completely make you think with your amygdala. So you go into that casino and it gives you sensory overload. It's so loud and it's so fun and there's so much flashiness and there's lights going off and there's the red carpet, and all these things are intentionally designed to put you in a state of dulled senses, of fight or flight mode. So you physically cannot think logically. You cannot process things logically. That's what the beautiful or gorgeous women do, like the overly sexualized video game characters. It is actually impossible because, sexual desire comes from the amygdala as well. And that's why, men like that, that's where sexual aggression comes from. So, when you hear these horrible stories about, men who wanted a sex favor from a woman and she said no, and all of a sudden he gets angry and he gets aggressive and he wants to like assault her and things like that and get violent, it's because, all of his thinking is coming from the same part of the brain. So sexual arousal and violence and aggression both come from the amygdala in his brain. So, you see a gorgeous woman or a sexualized female character, and immediately you can't process information logically. You're only thinking with your amygdala. The other thing they do is there's a lot of the color red in casinos, and like especially the carpet may be red or the walls may be red or whatever. These deep red hues and colors everywhere. Again, that's on purpose because red is the color of blood, and humans respond emotionally more to red than any other color. Red is the color that gets us excited. That's it gets us irrational. It gets our heart racing. It's like women wear red lipstick because when men see that, it makes them more attractive because the color red symbolize that, and it's the color of blood. So going back to the wilderness, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, if there was ever any blood, it either meant food because an animal had been killed or it meant another human had been hurt. So we react very strongly emotionally to the color red, and once again, it dulls our senses. And that's why, when you have a lot of news stories, cable news is like so much the color red is everywhere, and it also makes critical thinking harder as well. So it taps into that side of your brain that makes irrational decisions. Now let's talk briefly about social media. So social media is designed exactly like a slot machine. So the way slot machines are designed in gambling is that when you go in, you pull that lever and, it lines up those three things. And especially in the digital age with digital slot machines, what that does is it gives you a sense of reward even when you've lost. So, it lines up those three symbols, but then even if you didn't win, you'll still hear that sound of winning. And like even if you only won 50 cents, it'll still just bombard you on the screen with stars and explosions and things, celebratory things and that taps into your dopamine. You get a dopamine rush, which makes you want to do it again irrationally. And so Twitter and Facebook are actually designed to be like slot machines. That's why when you log into it, you have to pull down to refresh. So you're pulling down, there's that moment where it thinks, and then pop, there's your new notifications. And then you get that same reward. Like over on the side, you have the, and on Facebook especially, like when you have new notifications, they're in the color red. Once again, that's not coincidental. It's designed to get you addicted, to get you to keep coming back. Red, the color that we most emotionally respond to. And Twitter had to go with blue, I guess, because Facebook already had the color red in the bag. So, but you see those notifications, and then, there comes your sense of validation. So it's easier to believe misinformation on social media. And I've absolutely gone crazy with misinformation about this because we live in an information epidemic. People will believe everything they see online. And the reason I've gone crazy with that, I didn't realize how bad it was till I got on Facebook earlier this year, is that people believe what they want to believe, and that's called confirmation bias. So if you have a particular political persuasion, you only want to see things that confirm that political persuasion, and you'll block out things that don't. And if you see, like, if you're a conservative, you like seeing conservative memes and you like seeing conservative stories and headlines that support a conservative message. But the moment you see somebody post something left wing, you get angry, you get hostile, you start gritting your teeth, and your heart races and your face turns red, and you want to respond to that person and really tell them off and make fun of them. And so social media is designed to get that angry response out of you. And it's something that it's not good for your brain. I shared this, that arguing on social media is literally causing brain damage. It's causing irreversible brain damage. And it's doing the same thing that pornography does. It's doing the same thing that gambling does, is that, its origins are in our human ancestors who lived, out in the wilderness, and competition for resources was extraordinarily important. So when we lived out there, if we came in contact with another tribe, well, there may be only so much water to make our tribe survive, or there may be so much food or resources in the land for the survival of our troops. So we go to war. Well, we fight each other, and that competition, like the winner takes all. And that's an important part of what shaped human beings. So we're extraordinarily territorial. We're territorial about land. We're territorial about resources. And we still are. And it's one of the primary things that shapes the human mind. So with politics, and I'm not going to say which political side of the aisle is right or wrong. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, which side of the aisle do you want to be right? And you're going to be biased in believing what you believe based on that, because we all want to feel like we're on the winning team. We all want to feel like our tribe is the tribe that will dominate, that will kill the other tribe, that will slaughter them all, and we will have all the resources. Because once again, that dopamine rush, it's about survival. It's about our own survival. So we want to feel like we're on the winning team. That's why we all believe that our religion is the right religion. It's why we all believe that our side of the political aisle, left or right, conservative, liberal, libertarian, whatever, is the right side. And, we're going to dominate and we're going to win. It's why sports are a thing. It's why people get so big into sports and get so fanatical about it. I want to feel like I'm on the winning team. I want my team to win and I want the other team to lose. And, it's why war is a thing. It's why we go to war. It's why we fight over territory. Even still to this day, all these years later, we're supposed to be so much more enlightened than our primal ancestors were. But are we really? And so that's why people argue about politics. That's why we get emotionally threatened when we hear a political persuasion that we don't agree with. We start getting angry. We start getting hostile. It's like those inner hostilities. It's like a dog, the hair starts standing up on the back of its neck and it starts growling. It's like an encroachment on our territory. It's like, some instinct in us wants to lash out. And when you're watching political debates, and I do not watch these anymore. I used to a long time ago. When you watch, those talking head debate shows where you got one guy on one side and he's a liberal and one guy on the other side and he's a conservative, and they're yelling and hollering at each other and, beating their chest. And basically what you're watching is a modern day, ancient human going through all these dominance rituals, beating their chest and waving their spears and threatening each other. You're just seeing a modern day version of that. And it's not useful. It doesn't really get anything done. But people are attracted to conflict. So social media rewards that kind of conflict. And so something that's driving me crazy is that, COVID misinformation. And this is like the saddest thing in the world to me, because for some reason, COVID-19 has become politicized. And so it should be about being safe. Like, we're living in a pandemic. Be safe, wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance, and we'll get through this. But somehow it got twisted and turned into a political issue. So people are angry at each other and people share all this fake news claiming that masks don't work. And it's been proven that, they don't slow the COVID-19 virus. And it's amazing because when you're on social media, like I said, it's like you're in a casino and your senses are being dulled because they're being bombarded with so much reward system, with the red notifications that you get in the upper right-hand tab or whatever. And so now, your sensors are dulled. You're more in fight or flight mode. You're overly stimulated. Your brain's now marinating in dopamine, and you see something that is absolutely not true. You see something that looks like a news story, but someone posted it and it says something completely ridiculous. But if it confirms what you want to be true, you'll believe it without question. And that's what's driven me crazy, is that people believe stuff, fake information, because they see it on Facebook and they just believe it. Like, you can tell it's not true. If you go and actually read and study and do the analytical data, which nobody does that. Nobody wants to take the time to do that. You'll find out the headline was misleading or it only told you what you wanted. But see, like, news organizations are really preying on people right now. Like, people's inner sense are wanting, people wanting that conflict, or they want clicks, and the more outrageous they can be, or the more that they can satisfy one side, their headlines will be really outrageous because that's clickbait. That gets you to click and gets more ad revenue. So Facebook knows your political beliefs from what you share, and what they do is they finely tune what news they advertise. And when you see a news story pop up on Facebook, excuse me, it's going to be inclined towards your political persuasions, and then that's going to make you want to click on it, and it'll make you automatically believe. So it rewards confirmation bias. So people online are creating these echo chambers where they're saying their opinion and hearing their opinion brought back, and saying their opinion and hearing their opinion echoed back to them. And it makes you feel safe. It makes you feel like there's strength in numbers, but it's all artificial because it's social media. It's not real. It doesn't reflect real life. But now you're in this echo chamber where you feel like my side is the right side and we are the winning team. And once you see that one person say something you don't agree with, somebody will, if you're a conservative, you'll see a liberal opinion. All of a sudden you get angry and you start pounding things, and it's like all of a sudden you're in a bad mood now. And social media, like,
that's why people are trolls. That's why people argue so much and get so vicious and so horrible. They form these, nests and communities that go to war with each other. And it's all happening online. It's not happening in real life. So that's how social media encourages bullying. That's why we have cyberbullying now. That's why we have cyber stalking, because it's very easy to be a keyboard warrior. It's very easy to be, just tapping on a phone and not see this person in real life and dehumanize them in your mind. And, your brain will convince you this is an evil person. This is a bad person. This is called cognitive dissonance. We'll talk about that in a future live stream. So cognitive dissonance is, your opponent, be it a political opponent or someone of a different religion or whatever, your brain will twist that person into a more horrible or more monstrous person than they really are. So you don't view them as a human being anymore. But because they have a different look from you or a different political outlook or whatever, they see the world different from you. Your brain convinces you that they're the enemy, that they've got to be destroyed, defeated, and conquered. And so, is it a coincidence that America is burning right now? The people are out in the streets rioting. And, it's amazing when we're in these bubbles of confirmation bias. In reality, what I believe is that if you have political beliefs, as I do, you should actually expose yourself to the other side. You should listen to what the other side has to say. If you're a conservative, you should hear what liberals have to say. And if you're a liberal, you should hear what conservatives have to say, because that will actually exercise your beliefs. You can say, okay, what's wrong with this? And what research can I do to see if this is really true or false or whatever? And that makes you stronger. It makes you smarter. But when people get in these bubbles of confirmation bias, in reality, their beliefs are like a muscle. They've actually gotten weak. They're not getting any exercise, any stress testing. So the moment they hear another opinion, they go berserk. They lose their minds. They don't know how to emotionally, mentally process it. They've been thinking with their amygdalas. Their brains have been marinating in dopamine all this time. They get angry. They get aggressive. And now they're actually going out in the streets and burning things and flipping cars. And what are they even angry about? I don't even know anymore. Like, people keep talking about how America's on the verge of a civil war. We're going to start going to war with each other. Shooting is going to start. And what? Over what? Over Donald Trump winning the election? Over people having different political beliefs? At least with the Civil War, the real Civil War, there was a real definable reason and there was a real definable objective on both sides. And both sides knew what they were fighting for. But if we broke out into a civil war in this nation, I don't even know what we'd be fighting over. I mean, I'm not going to say it's over Trump, because presidencies are temporary. Like, there's going to come a day and time where Trump's not going to be president anymore. There's going to be another president someday. So, people are so in the moment right now. They're not thinking long term, that violence is never the answer. So I really think that social media addiction may be one of the reasons why there's violence, why there's rioting in the streets going on right now, and just all these terrible things going on. It's a consequence of people not thinking clearly. Social media, the way it's designed, rewards you for having a weak mind and, punishes you for trying to be a critical thinker and learn to think with your mind and not your emotions or your amygdala. So get off your phone. And I know there's no easy solution to that, because this is how we communicate. Like, this is it. The phones are here and they're not going anywhere. So social media addiction, all of that, it's not going anywhere. But there's a way you can break the addiction. So first of all, don't ever argue with anyone. That's one of my philosophies of social media. And I used to get into arguments with people and it would make me miserable. And what I hated was the feeling of, like, you said something to somebody and you think, man, I had a devastating argument. They're not going to be able to come up with a response to that. But then, like, you wait for their response. And so you're just going about your normal day. You're at work, you're going to get coffee or whatever. But in the back of your mind, there's it hanging over your head. They're going to respond. And are you going to have a response ready? And that brings you a sense of dread. And that's not good for you. So I'm done with it. I will not argue with people about politics on social media or religion or which religion is right or is there a God or isn't there a God or whatever. I'm having no part of it. I mean, I have my blog, I have my live streams that I do. If you care what I have to say about stuff, listen to it. You can tell me why I'm wrong in the comments, and I will totally ignore you. But I just want to enjoy life. I mean, life is temporary, and it's here, and it can be enjoyed. So, like, you really need to have breaks. Like, you need to have restrictions in place. Like, you know, maybe have only certain times of the day where you allow yourself to get on social media, but then, like, when you're at home with your family, like, exile your phone to the bedroom, plug it into its charger or whatever, get off of Facebook, social media, do things with your family, you know, go outdoors, you know, go on a hike, go out enjoying the woods. Those things are so good for your mind. Like, if all this, you know, pornography and social media addiction and gambling is devastating or catastrophic to your nervous system, nature, man, nature is it. You know, our brains reward us with so much happiness, real happiness and endorphins from being out, exercising, hiking, breathing fresh air, things like that. You know, don't bring your phone with you, but listen to the sounds of peace, you know, the sounds of nature, the birds chirping and, you know, the wind blowing in the trees, rustling the leaves, things like that. We need that quiet time. So what you can do is there's a couple of things you can do to break these addictions. One of them is remember that even though you know the addiction's bad, before you go into it, there's always that irrationality that takes over. And so you need to target that moment of irrationality. So if you're addicted to porn, for example, you know it's wrong, you know you shouldn't look at it, you know the damaging effects that it has. But because you get that feel-good rush out of it, your brain is very good at making up excuses like, well, I'll just watch it this one time and then that'll be the last time, and then I'll never look at it again. And so you really want to, and you start getting excited about what you're going to look at, and then your heart starts racing and your brain really becomes more alert, and all of a sudden you can't think clearly, and then next thing you know, you're doing it. And then after it's over with, that's when the guilt, the crash, the depression happens. So you have to target that moment of irrationality. You have to do things to attack that. You know, if you try to do it on your own willpower, you'll never do it. You'll never argue your way out of doing something that your brain wants to do, that it wants to reward you with. So, like, before you look at porn or whatever, like, go to a quiet place, to a room, and if you're a Christian, pray. Spend time thinking and meditating on the catastrophic effects. Think about the guilt that you consciously know and are aware of will happen afterward. You need to target that dopamine rush and replace it with something. So don't make the excuses that lead you there. And so, for example, if you've struggled with porn addiction but you're out of it now, you know, there's a saying that, you know, you may think you've beaten your addiction, but your addiction is in the corner doing push-ups, patiently waiting to come back. So it is so easy to make an excuse that will lead you back there. And you know, you remember, this is the story of Adam and Eve. This is the story of Eve, of why she ate the forbidden fruit. You know, go back to the book of Genesis, that the serpent tempted Eve. He didn't just walk up to her and say, here's the forbidden fruit, and shove it into her mouth. But he lured her there, and he didn't make her sin at first, but he, you know, technically it wasn't a sin to go to the tree. Technically it wasn't a sin to look at the tree or see that it was nice to look at, or, you know, it may not have even been a sin to reach out and touch the forbidden fruit and feel it, but it was a sin to eat it. And so the devil lured her there step by step by step by step. So if you've struggled with porn addiction, for example, you may say, well, I'm not going to look at porn, but I'm going to look at, you know, a lingerie catalog. That's not porn. It's technically okay. Or, you know, I'm going to look at, you know, images of my favorite movie star who is really attractive. But see, once you get that little trigger of sexual arousal going on deep inside, all of a sudden that insatiable urge will start coming back. And next thing you know, you'll be rationalized your way. Well, if I just do it this one time, if I just look at porn this one time, you know, like, and when you go back, when you've beaten an addiction, when you go back into it a second time, that second time is always worse than the first time. So you need to attack and target that particular moment of irrationality beforehand. You need to go through like a mental detox, and detox is terrible. So drug detox is like if you've been on heroin, for example, when you get off heroin, your body is going through agony. Like your nervous system is attacking you, crying out desperately for another fix of not really the heroin, but the dopamine. You know, you're cold, you're sweating, you feel sick, you throw up, and it's a horrible feeling for maybe a couple of weeks until you start to feel better and all the drugs finally get out of your system. Well, it's the same way with these addictions of the mind, like, you know, the pornography and the gambling. It's like when you stop doing it, your brain is going to drive you crazy, begging you, crying out to do it. And it's like, it really helps to have somebody who's there for you. You know, that's why, like Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, you've got someone to call who's your accountability partner, and they actually have pornographic, well, I shouldn't have phrased it that way. You know, if you're trying to get out of porn addiction, they have like accountability partners now, and they have apps that do this, so you can call that person at any time and he won't be judgmental, and he'll be like, don't do it, man. And he'll give you that boost of encouragement not to get back into it. You know, just like, you know, drug addiction, alcoholism, whatever, these addictions you have to come out of. And honestly, I would say the same with social media. When you first try to not be on social media as much every day, man, your brain is going to go crazy. You're going to just have the urge to get on it, to click on Facebook, to see that red notifications button, to see who's talked to you, to see what kind of acknowledgement you've gotten. But don't do it. It's, you know, just limit it to certain amounts of time every day and then spend the rest of the day off of it and do something else that will reward your brain with something better, something healthier. You know, there are healthy addictions out there. And don't get discouraged by the setbacks, because setbacks are going to happen. And, you know, when you're coming out of addiction, it's very easy to fall back in and then just beat up on yourself and then give up completely altogether. And dieting, you know, dieting's a good way to illustrate that. So when you're dieting and, you know, exercising and losing weight, you know, you might get encouraged because you're losing 5 pounds this week and 5 pounds another week. But then that 1 week, you'll only lose 2 or 3 pounds, and then you get discouraged, and then you want to give up, and you just want to go back and just forget the whole thing and eat all the ice cream in the freezer and just gain all the weight back. But don't do it. Remember, it's a journey. You just lost 2 pounds, but you'll lose more in future weeks. And so that's basically just a brief covering of my thoughts on how to recover from these addictions. So I'll have another mental health live stream hopefully next week. So thank you everyone for tuning in who watched. I hope you got something out of this, and I will see you all later.